pass it over to David, and hope you all enjoy.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you very much to Michael for joining us today and lending his voice to this, to his life story to inform us and give us a new perspective. For those of you who don't know, Michael Saavedra is he's a legal coordinator for the LA Youth Justice Coalition. He's also a UCLA underground scholar and a former incarcerated person. He has a very fascinating story and has done a lot of very good work for incarcerated persons, especially those in juvenile incarcerated persons. So I wanted to just hand it over to him and ask him, Michael, if you wouldn't mind telling us, you know, you grew up during the war on drugs when it was first getting rolling. I want to know, you know, where do you come from? What was your life like as a youth growing up in Southern California?
Yeah, so I think I could put it for more clarity. If people used to watch some of the old like gangster rap videos like NWA, that was literally the streets back then in the late 80s, early 90s. I grew up in the housing projects in East LA. And just like that during that whole era, you know, people was watching, you know, folks on almost every block selling dope. It was just really a lively time, if I should say. A lot of gang banging, a lot of police action. It was a whole game of cat and mouse, I believe. And, you know, people in the neighborhood were struggling already economically. And for a lot of us youth, that was family, being a part of a neighborhood. It was protection. It was also a means of earning money. And so I quickly fell into that. You know, I fell in love with that lifestyle, so to speak. And I watched, you know, some of my peers doing the same thing. And so I thought it was really cool. And then that quickly, of course, led me into juvenile hall at the age of 14. And then at the age of 17, I was arrested and sent to prison for carrying a firearm and having drugs, possession of narcotics. I went to prison, and early on, from the onset, I learned very quickly as a young kid who was like about 150 pounds, very skinny, young, scared. A juvenile hall was really like cool for me. I seen a lot of my friends that I grew up with, but prison, it was a whole different ball game. You know, going there at 17 years old, seeing these grown men with a bunch of tattoos and big old mustaches, and you know, it was pretty terrifying, to be honest. And so I quickly had to learn how to survive. And prison is such a, sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, how did you navigate that as a young man? You know, going into prison. Prison has its own, you know, set of politics and, you know, things you got to learn real quickly, and that must have been, you know, quite an experience. So how did you survive for so long?
So one of the things that I really learned very quickly was racism, to be honest, because the prison, the way it's set up, when you go in, they separate you by race, by geographic location. If you're from the South or Southern California, as opposed to Northern California, everything's segregated racially. And so that's part of the whole prison politics that you learn to survive, is like, you can't, you know, associate with these people. You can't go play basketball with these people. Everything was very segregated and very, I would say, racially eccentric, so to speak. Everybody was really grounded in their roots and their racial history and their culture. And that's what led me to start learning more and more about my culture, about my history. But really, one of the key things about prison, and this is not good at all, it's actually very sad, but it's the way the prison industrial complex has set it up to divide and conquer, right? So you have a lot of racial animosity and a lot of drug abuse, a lot of drugs entering there, and now cell phones. I'm pretty sure some of you have read stories or seen news articles about, you know, the guards getting in trouble for bringing in, you know, hundreds of phones, some of them making over $100,000 a year just on selling contraband cell phones in prison. And one thing about prison is it's very violent. And in order to survive, you have to become pretty much violent in nature. You have to like be able to desensitize yourself. You have to cut all feelings and emotions off and become like this hard and cold person if you want to survive. If not, it's very difficult, especially if you have family, if you have loved ones, if you have kids or a wife or a girlfriend, or a mother that you're close to. That separation and only being able to see them behind a glass visit once a month, or maybe sometimes once a year, or being able to talk to them for a couple of minutes on the phone, it could really be, cause a person to become very depressed and very sad and lonely. And in
So it
prison,
sounds like, you know, the that racism and violence is sort of like something that everybody kind of gets out of it. It sort of perpetuates these, you know, harmful attitudes, harmful activities, and yet somehow you seem, despite that, you having to learn to deal with that and probably to, you know, internalize that yourself, you still were a leader and an organizer within the prison system. In 2011 and 2013, you organized hunger strikes. And so, you know, and I know that was a result of you being in solitary confinement. So, you know, what led you to make that decision, and how did that go for you?
so just a little context. Yes, I spent, out of the 20 years I was incarcerated, I spent 15 of those 20 years in solitary confinement, straight the whole time. But because of all that violence and wanting to be a part of that culture and wanting to grow quickly in the hierarchy of things and become a leader, I was sent to solitary confinement. But once I was there, I seen a completely different set of people. I seen my elders. I seen a lot of different elders from different racial backgrounds, different factions, and all sharing with each other, sharing books, sharing knowledge. Because in solitary, you're very limited on your social abilities to associate with other people and socialize. And so I just began to read a lot of books. I began to also, during that time is also when I began to learn the law, and I appealed my own case. I started to find case law supporting, you know, the fact that I was denied due process and being kept in isolation indefinitely. And that's what really motivated me to keep learning the law out here and into the job and the work I do. However, also during this time, there have been people who were in solitary confinement for already decades, like some people 20 years. And all of it is mostly behind learning your own culture, you know, teaching others about your culture and just having that racial unity. And if you go back in history and you remember, solitary confinement was initially used to keep folks like people that were from the Black Panthers and I'm sorry, I had a brain freeze right now, but
Doors.
yeah.
Yeah, it seems like, you know, if you stick yourself out like that as a leader, somebody who's willing to, you know, educate others and educate themselves, you become a danger. Do you think you become a danger to the system a bit and kind of paint a target on your back?
Yeah, definitely. And that's what happened with a lot of the organizers from the Black Panthers that were put in solitary. And so with myself and others, we started to realize that, you know, we're being not only punished, but we're like not in prison, we're put under the prison, right? And literally, Pelican Bay is like a bunker. If you ever go there, it looks exactly like a bunker. You go underground into these like tunnels, and there's these catacombs of cells. It's really, really isolated. Um, but during that time, people started realizing, you know, this is very oppressive, and we need to do something to change this. You know, we're killing each other, we're fighting against each other over pretty much nothing, right? And this is what our oppressors, this is what the prison industrial complex wants to use against us, to say that, oh, you see how violent they are and how we have to keep them isolated. And so around 2011, we started having discussions amongst us to, you know, first thing first, in order, if we're going to do something about this and be proactive, we want to organize and create some type of protest around it to get attention and also to stop the use of solitary confinement. But the first thing we had to do was learn to put all our differences and hostilities and animosities aside. And so we came to an agreement to end all our hostilities amongst all races and factions in there and unite in solidarity to figure out what we were going to do. And one of the things that people thought, you know, some people, because of the violent nature that prison creates and induces in a person. Folks wanted to do like, oh, let's hold hostages and do what they did in Attica, or you know, those type of violent things, right? And others were like, no, that does not work. You've seen what happened. Something similar to George Jackson, like let's hold hostages and escape, right? That was the person I was talking about, who they actually meant to have solitary confinement for, people like himself and others who organized. And so we realized that, you know, if we use more violence and those type of tactics, then we're actually feeding into their whole plan, right? Their design. And so when we figured out that, you know what, we could do something, peaceful protest, let's do a hunger strike. That'll get us attention. That'll get people on the outside to know about the conditions in here, the deplorable, unconstitutional conditions that we're kept in. And so that's what we decided as a collective to do, a mass hunger strike. And so that having that solidarity and peace amongst Black and brown and white and Black and others was very necessary.
Yeah, and it seems like it's an uphill battle if they're, as part of it, they're instilling in you that combativeness and the racism and, you know, trying to divide and conquer, as you say. For you and others to, you know, build that solidarity is actually astounding. How did the system respond to that? What was the outcome of those hunger strikes?
The system, which is the system, right, which is a very punitive system. So of course, anything that is against their rules or taking power away from them. I mean, you would think the simple fact, if I don't want to eat, I should, as a human being, as a free person in a free country, I should be able to have that right, not to refuse my food, right? However, they took it very to heart, and their reaction was more punitive. So what they did was they said, okay, you guys want to be tough, you want to be on a hunger strike. And so what they did was they came and searched everybody's cell. So they would basically cuff everybody up, take us out the cell, search our cell, and make sure we didn't have one crumb of food in there that we're trying to hide or hoard or trying to last to be able to go through this hunger strike. They wanted to make sure we're really hunger striking. And so that was a very punitive thing that they did. And they would also block our doors so that we couldn't fish, which means like in SHU and solitary and most ADSEGs or solitary confinement institutions, you know, people become very innovative in how they communicate with others and how they resourceful in how you get stuff and how you get stuff done. And so in the SHU, in order to communicate with each other, we would make these like a small piece of soap tied to a line, like a fishing line, and throw it out on the tier, and another person would cross that line, catch it, tie on, and you're able to pass notes, pass anything, books, and that's how we communicate and socialize with each other. So they made sure by putting these barriers across our doors that we couldn't communicate with anybody. And so then it was time to like, okay, we need to get the message out to the general population and everybody in solitary and in the streets of what we're doing and how we want to do it at one time. And we're able to pass that communication to where we had over 6,000 people participate in the first hunger strike.
And so, you know, if you eventually went on to sue the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, right? You did that a few times. So how did you get from, you know, having these hunger strikes going to actually being able to file a suit? How did that go for you?
So for me, prior to my placement in solitary confinement, while I was still in general population, I was very frustrated with my lawyer. And I was also very frustrated with my appeals attorney. And I felt like I was wronged by the judge. I felt like I was given way too much time. And so I began to go to the law library and as a means just to get out of the cell, be able to go read some books. And I started learning the law in that process of the criminal law, excuse me. And then once I was in solitary confinement, I started utilizing those same research methods and same, strategies of looking up the law, looking up due process clause in the context of solitary confinement placement. And I started finding a bunch of different case law that supported my case and my issues. And so I began to draft my very first civil complaint. And from there, it just kept perpetuating because every 6 years they would review my case, and they would also come with new information and continue my solitary confinement. So I would have to file a new lawsuit. And yes,
Yeah.
so I filed 2 suits inside. The third suit I had filed right before my release, and I got to litigate it out here in a federal district court with a suit
That's
and tie,
awesome.
as opposed to a prison jumpsuit, which made
Yeah,
a complete difference.
I really want to, I think it's fascinating that you learned how to do out of necessity what law students all across the country have to learn to do in theory. So in your experience, because I know that you also helped other incarcerated persons with their, with their process and, suing and, helping with them. So I want to hear about that. What was that process like? How did you come to, educate your fellow incarcerated people? And have you ever actually helped anybody, get an appeal or anything like that? Do you have any stories on that?
Yes, I help very many people. So when you're in a pod, right, or it's called a pod, but it's a section of solitary where there's 4 cells on the bottom and 4 on top, right? And so people would hear what I was doing, and we would just have conversations in the vent, just shooting the breeze, and oh, what are you working on? I'm doing this. Oh wow, you know how to do that. I feel like they would tell me their story about their case, and I'll be like, oh, okay, that was a Bradley violation or whatever it has. That's ineffective assistance of counsel. Look up this case law and you'll see this, and then research it, and I could help you write it. And so that's how it would start. And then by word of mouth, people would always see me with my little briefcase, homemade briefcase, going to the law library all the time. And so people would ask me questions in there. How do you do this? How do you look up a case? How do you write a summary judgment, an opposition to summary judgment, or what have you? And so I just began, helping others. But at the same time, I would also tell people, like, I don't want to do this for you. I could do this for you, but you're not going to learn. And what's going to happen is you're not going to be self-sufficient. You're going to be depending and relying upon me. And what continually happened during my time in solitary was, of course, retaliation, because if the guards can see this guy is causing damage to us, he's already sued us and won, and now he's helping other people to sue us and win, or helping other people to get out, he's definitely a threat to our, our livelihood and our jobs, right? And so they would continually move me. It would take me, oh, you have a, I will go to the law library, and meanwhile, they'll be in my cell rolling up all my property and moving me to another part of the of solitary confinement, and sometimes placing me in places where I wouldn't be able to talk to anybody, or there would be nobody there, just to disrupt that organizing and assistance and helping educate others. And so I would always teach people, kind of like the Bible, right? I could give you a fish and feed you today, or I could teach you how to fish and you could learn and feed yourself for the rest of your life. And so I would tell them, if something happens and they take me away or move me, you're going to be stuck. You're going to be back at the same place, scrambling, looking for somebody to help you. But if you learn it yourself, you can become empowered and do your own appeal, and then also pass that along to other fellow prisoners in here who may need help. And so it's like a cycle.
Yeah, one of the things that I think gets lost a lot in law school is that, the services we provide are, meant to be services that you can provide for yourself. There's supposed to be a system by which you can obtain justice, but they make it so convoluted and crazy that it requires some sort of expertise. But it's amazing to hear about somebody saying, I need to seek justice for myself, and getting out there and actually learning how to do it, and then providing help for others. So is that kind of the mindset that you had when you eventually were released and, took that into your activism? And, I want to hear about how you started helping out people once you got out of prison.
Sure. So once I got out of prison, but before I got out of prison, one of the things that we're asking for during the hunger strike was not only our freedom from solitary confinement, but also higher education in solitary confinement, because there was no type of educational programs in solitary at all. And having, for myself, I didn't even go to high school. So I I was kicked out of junior high, expelled, and I never went back to school after that. So everything I did, I'm sort of an autodidactic. I learned upon myself. And so during the hunger strikes, one of the things we're asking for was educational programs inside the jail, inside the solitary, right? And so I was able to take my GED. I studied for it. I was a quick learner. I passed it. And then they did agree to start giving us, it was a pilot program that they started through Coastline Community College to offer correspondence courses, right, to people inside solitary confinement. So I took those courses. I did very well, and I was just like amazed at, you know, how well I could do, because I never really was interested in school. And now here I am interested in school. And part of that was also going out to the yard or even talking in events to others and teaching them about school and the law. And so once I was released in 2017, I immediately went to, I enrolled in the community college near where I lived. At the time, I was staying with my parents when I got out in Moreno Valley, which is in Riverside, Inland Empire. And so I went to Riverside City College. I enrolled, which was also a whole, it was like a whole new world, like being on another planet when I first got out, because keep in mind, I was locked up for 20 years. And so things have definitely changed in 20 years. Hairstyles, clothing styles, music, technology, computers, cell phones, all these things that I had no idea about and had to learn very quickly, and was even kind of embarrassed when I went to enroll at the community college and they said, go ahead and get on that computer and fill out the application. And I'm like, I don't even know how to turn this thing on, right? Which was really embarrassing. And the person, she was like, you don't know how to use a computer? Like, what's wrong with you? Where have you been? Or, you know, and it was really embarrassing, but I have to say that is sort of the things that led me to starting a student club for formerly incarcerated students at my school called Transitioning Minds. So I started that club specifically for that reason, to help formerly incarcerated people coming out, students that are formerly incarcerated, to have a home where they feel welcome, they have community, and then also petitioning the school for resources for this specific class of students. And so that was how I number one, coped with it, and number two, helped develop a program and resources for folks like myself.
What were conditions like for you after you got out? You know, you said you went and enrolled in school, but that couldn't have been easy. You know, I always hear when people get out that it's all about sort of the community you find yourself in, and you know, the people who you're able to reach out to. So what was that like for you, re-entering into society?
So for one, I was fortunate enough to have my family, right, to be able to take me in, because when they release you, it's like, here's your $200 gate money and go on, like, good luck, right? So having those resources and having family there to support you was a huge difference. But also, like, I was also on a very high controlled parole, because my case was an armed robbery. So they had me as a violent criminal, etc. Also as a gang member, etc. So they were really on my tail, so to speak, right? Like visits, searching my house, my mother's home, which was really, you know, I didn't want to bring that to them either, but it's like, you know, they didn't mind. They would be like, oh, we don't mind going through this because we want you to be here. We want you to be free. But it was really a bunch of harassment and just nonstop. So I wanted to make sure this time that I stood out and that I was never going to go back again. So I tried to comply with all the rules and regulations and going to school. But it was also a huge culture clash, right? Because here I am with a bunch of much younger students and just feeling, you know, and at the same time going through my own emotions, because when I put it to people, it sounds weird, right? But I was like around 26 when I was, the last time I was arrested and incarcerated. And so it would be like, especially going straight to solitary confinement and being in solitary confinement for that long of a period of time, it's like they would take you now and put you in a bubble and put you in outer space for 20 years, right? And so after 20 years, they bring that bubble down to earth and let you out and you're free. But all your memories, all your experiences are from 20 years ago. So
Yeah.
you're kind of like living in the past, right?
Yeah,
And
I can
so,
imagine.
and now you're free. So you're like a kid in a candy shop, right? There's all these things you can go get alcohol. You can now, marijuana is legal, etc. And then there's, if you haven't been in relationships for 20 years or seen, girls or women in 20 years, it's like everything is here, right? And so just dealing with all that and trying to also maintain, your self-discipline, your goals, your direction, what I want to do. I don't want to go back to my old neighborhood, because when people find out, oh, you got out, come back to the hood, let's party, there's going to be drugs, everything's going to be there for you. You could go back to that lifestyle. In a way, you have that calling because those are your family. Those are people that you grew up with and, had meaning to you. But so that was one of the things that I kind of not really struggle with, but tried to avoid and stay on track and just stay involved in school. But it was really funny because being an older person than many of the students, dressing, as my sister would say, still dressing like the 90s. So I had to change my dress code, change the way I speak to people, just learning to be interactive with people again, humans, like face to face, because I was in solitary for so long. And then the whole, dating again after so long, being nervous, talking to people, just always thinking too that the campus police are watching me. They probably know, my parole officer probably called them and told them I'm here. So every time I would walk to the car or what have you, I would feel like they were constantly watching me. So it was many different emotions and experiences, but all great. And I'm all very grateful for it. And I finally finished this last month and got accepted to every UC that I applied for: Berkeley, UCLA, Santa Barbara, and Riverside. So
That's awesome. That's an amazing achievement. Coming out of being incarcerated for so long and just your background generally. How has that been going, by the way? How have you been handling, school and whatnot in the time of COVID and whatnot?
So it's funny because when I first got out, I was staying with my parents and my sister, and then her husband got out, who was also living there, and he was on parole. And so they told us that we couldn't live in the same household together, which is crazy, right? And I didn't want him to leave, so I left. And I went through some struggles. I did end up getting a job with a law firm, which was great, as a discovery clerk. Like, they hired me on the spot because it was this really bougie, if I may say, family law firm, right? Really nice, in this beautiful glass building. My friend had worked there as a secretary, and so she's the one that was like, recommended me. I went. The gentleman, he was an older gentleman. He was really cool. Had a beautiful office, and he tested me on discovery, and I was like, on point.
You got this.
Like, you're hired. We need you. When can you start today? So I was on it. But after a few weeks, it's funny because you know how every office or every place pretty much has this one nosy person that's always trying to be up in everybody's business and always like being the, kissing butt to the boss type person, right? And so one day she was Googling something on due process through Google Scholar. They have law or like research papers, etc. So she was looking up a case on due process, and my case came up, and it said Saavedra versus Harrington, or CDCR, right? And so here it says Mexican mafia prisoner Michael Saavedra, armed robbery, this and that. They're suing the Department of Corrections for keeping them in solitary. And she was like, oh my God. So she called me in her office and she said, Michael, is this you? And I was like, oh shit, in my mind, sorry. I was like, oh snap, like, what do I do, right? And I'm sure my face probably turned red. I'm sure I was sweating bullets. I don't have a very good poker face. And so I told her no, that that could be, there's probably a ton of Michael Saavedras, which, my name is not very common, like Hernandez or Garcia. So, but then I guess she had told the boss, and shortly thereafter they let me go. And so I was homeless. I was jobless for a while. And I met the folks at YJC, Youth Justice Coalition, who were looking for somebody as well to be their legal coordinator. And so I found a home there, and it has really changed my life working with youth. working with the
Yeah.
law.
I wanted to get to that too. I just want to note that it's probably the first time I've ever heard of somebody having job prospects limited for having their name in case books. This is, that's pretty wild. So how did you get involved with the LA Youth Justice Coalition? And, what has your work been like with through that organization?
So prior to me getting out, I heard of this program called Project Rebound at Fullerton, at Cal State Fullerton. And so I wrote them, and there's this wonderful person there named Romarilyn Ralston, who was also formerly incarcerated. She had been incarcerated for 25 years, I believe, on a wrongful conviction. And I think it was the Innocence Project that had gotten her out. And now she's a doctor at at Fullerton. And she runs Project Rebound there. And so during our correspondence, she told me you need at least 60 credits to get here. I was still very short of that. So I had to complete community college. But she started inviting me to these different formerly incarcerated student conferences, right? And so they had their first annual one at Cal State LA. And so I went, I met Anthony Robles, I met other people there who, started introducing me to Project Rebound there and also to YJC. I went to Sacramento to work on the use of force bill, the police use of force bill. And I just fell in love with the work and the people there. And then they needed a legal coordinator. So the legal coordinator was an actual lawyer who graduated from UCLA Law School. But after so much time, her student loans kicked in and she owed a lot of money. So she had to go get a real job because, of course, nonprofits and social justice doesn't pay as much. And so I took the job, and then, but it wasn't enough to live in LA, and I was doing the whole commute stuff. And then I also applied to Critical Resistance. They were looking for an LA organizer, and they actually happen to have their same office in our space, right? So for those who don't know, if you Googled Chuco's Justice Center, it's a former juvenile courthouse in South Central LA, which used to be a funnel for the school to prison pipeline. I mean, they used to send thousands of youth to incarceration from there. And now it's we managed to close it down through some of the YJC's policy work. And now it's a space where we have offices in there. We turn the courtrooms into meeting rooms. There's still, as an exhibit, as a reminder of what that place used to be, there's still cells in the back and also solitary confinement cells, which is pretty scary for me, but I can imagine for a young child to be placed in those type of cells, right? So I began my work there, and I was able to, have two jobs, which equaled, they were both part-time, but now they equal to a full-time job. I was making a livable wage to where I can move out here. And then, but I also wanted to keep up with my school. And so people, even my mentor, Chelsea, the attorney, my predecessor, would tell me, Michael, you cannot do full-time school and full-time organizing. That is crazy. But I did. I managed to do it. And it was very difficult. I mean, I have bags under my eyes because I don't sleep very much. And just knocking it out, being the hustler that I am as I was in prison, just nonstop. Of course, it can take a toll on you. And then more recently, I won the Justice Catalyst Fellowship, which is a fellowship created at a Harvard Law School for graduating attorneys who want to get into social justice work. So you come up with a project and you say, oh, I want to do maybe cremation, or I want to do legal workshops for people in communities of color. And they fund you. They give you $60,000 a year to start you off on your project if you win or if you are eligible. So you apply and they pick so many people out of the year. And what's really exciting about that is I'm the first formerly incarcerated person to get that fellowship, and the first non-lawyer who hasn't even went to law school yet. So I'm really excited about that. And that's where I am now and working with Justice LA.
First of all, I just want to say congratulations on all the work you're doing. I guess I want to ask you, in your opinion, what's the best way for current law students to get involved in social justice work like what you're doing? They
could definitely email me at Michael at excuse me, Michael, can I just put in the text box, maybe?
Yeah, definitely. If you have like a link or something you want to share, feel free. In fact, I think a lot of us would prefer that. But yeah,
Okay. I'll put it in the chat box.
and we can probably also just link in the group me anything if you want to email me the link as well, just for people to after this meeting have access to that. I think that would also be awesome. Um, And you know, also, you know, we talked about this before, you know, by the phone, but you know, there's a lot. The conversation now across America is very largely on, you know, black and brown unity, and you know, people of color unifying against police brutality and brutality from the system generally, the justice system, you know, weighing heavily on minority communities. So I just want to know, what in your opinion is the best step forward towards building that kind of solidarity and making meaningful, long-lasting change?
So part of my work, so I'm part of the Justice LA Coalition, right? So we're the ones that were able to stop the $3.2 billion jail from being built in LA County, which was supposed to be a mental health jail. And we all know, you know, you can't get well in a cell, and we have a huge homeless population. We have so many issues, right? And so we were able to convince the Board of Supervisors, the LA County Board of Supervisors, to divest that $3.2 billion and invest in community care, invest in youth development, housing, reentry services, education, all these different things, peace builders, which also goes into defunding the police. And then more recently with the Black Lives Matter movement, I work with Patrisse Cullors, who is the founder of Black Lives, the co-founder, I should say, of Black Lives Matters movement organization. So once all this happened, you know, we started supporting our Black brothers and sisters, because again, taking from what I learned inside and the peace treaties inside to out here, especially where our space is in South Central, we have our building is also a high school for LA Youth Build, which is like sort of a continuation school for kids who have been pushed out of regular schools. But one of the things was, when we moved in there, some of the students are from different parts of LA. And so there's a lot of racial and gang animosity in that neighborhood. So
Right.
I, along with some others, some fellow Black leaders, were able to create a peace treaty there amongst the Black and brown community and neighborhoods, right? And so once we started with the Black Lives Matters movement, once all this stuff, you know, happened after George Floyd and the protests, you started to see, I don't know if some of you have seen it, or maybe on social media more than mainstream news, but there were, you know, Mexicans or Latinos or brown people, if you will, being attacked, older people who are selling like ice cream vendors on the streets, right? Were being attacked by young Black youth. And so it really sparked that old animosity, that old hatred to come back out, right? And people were very inflamed and infuriated by it. And so, of course, like we all know, with this new generation of, I call it social media gangbanging, because in the past, if you had beef with somebody, you know, you or sometimes it would cross you out on the wall, like you put your name, you know, and so people would, like, you put David Portillo, right? So it would cross you out. I'll put Michael Saavedra #1, like F David Portillo, right? It's something like that, right? But you would see me and, hey, what's up? Why'd you cross me out? But now on social media, you have these social media gangbangers like F you, you know, just saying things to people that they wouldn't normally say to their face, right?
Right.
And so now people feel more liberated to say whatever. And so on some of these posts where they're showing the vendors being attacked, folks would inflame the situation by saying, see, that's what we get for supporting these guys and blah, 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 just being really, really hostile. And so
it seems like online culture kind of makes it harder for you to build those peace treaties, like you're saying a little bit.
definitely. However, and this all goes to a vision of abolition and a vision of accountability and peace building in the communities where we don't need police, right? So as we all know each other in the community, and there's different leaders in the community, Black, brown, etc., we were able to call upon the Black leaders from that community where we know these young gentlemen are from, and like, hey, what's going on? Let's have a sit down, let's talk before this thing gets out of control, right? We need each other. And so we were able to have a sit down with those gentlemen, and then later they brought those youngsters in, and we had I guess what you would call a transformative justice circle, right? And you know, the young gentlemen apologized, that were held accountable. You know, the harm was repaired, and we said, okay, let's work on, you know, building together, Black and brown, right? So that we could support y'all, and also the community can see, the brown community, that we're being supported as well. And so that's what we've been doing. Every Thursday, we have them at the Chucos Justice Center at 5 p.m. Now they're discussing, we've opened them up to community as well. And we have a professor from UCR who comes, and many other people from other organizations. And what we're gonna plan to do to make it, you know, more open, but also have trepidations and fears, is we're gonna put it on Zoom for folks to be able to come in and join, as opposed to in person because of COVID, et cetera, right? And just making it more accessible. The only fear I have is people will go back, resort to that social media type of gangsterism, and maybe say things, and, you know, it's always different, right? But that's one of the things we're working on. There was another recent one in Long Beach, which everybody probably seen on the news, where these were not children, these were men with guns. And when people try to come out, they're telling them, get inside, get inside. But it's really perplexing to me to say that that was authentic, right? Because if we go back into history, and let's say for the Black Panthers, for instance, right? The
COINTELPRO.
Yes. They infiltrate organizations, right? Whether it be through informants, through agent provocateurs, and just me, you know, not wanting to be quick to say, okay, this was a racial thing. Like I try to be a critical thinker and view things from that critical lens, and just seeing why, if it's me, I'm not gonna risk my life or my time, rather, you know, going to prison for a life sentence to rob a guy for a measly, you know, maybe $200. You know, that's crumbs. To do a broad daylight robbery like that, and also, you know, telling people to go inside. And once you have a gun on a person and you move them, that could be considered kidnap robbery, right? You move their person so many feet. And so I just can't fathom the fact that people would do that, go out of their way just to rob a guy, right? Or just to harm this person and take his money. So I do believe it is agent provocateurs. I definitely believe that's something that's going on. We've had, you know, Patrice Cullors, who's part of our organization and also the co-founder of Black Lives Matter. Her home was raided. They were, you know, saying, oh, you're a terrorist organization, this and that. So I definitely believe that that is something. And going back into prison, you know, most of my experiences and everything, I come up with solutions or answers or you know, situations. I could resort back to prison experience and say, well, this is similar to what they try to stop us with, retaliation, right? So they do retaliation out here. They do those type of things. So yeah, so it's important right now, for one, to calm the brown community and get people back into solidarity and organizing and coming together. And so now we have these meetings, and folks are really, you know, pumped up. They want to get involved in organizing. They want to get involved in advocacy work, protests, etc. So, you know, yeah, it's exciting.
I do want to, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for questions. If anybody does have a question, by the way, in the audience, just drop it in the chat and I'll read them out. But before we get to that though, we had talked before about just right now with the COVID crisis, you know, there's a lot of organizations doing a lot of really good work, especially to get, you know, inmates out. I know, like, you know, the Public Law Center in Orange County is, you know, is just sending in application after application for people who are at high risk for COVID to get them out. And I know you've been doing a lot of work in that regard as well. Would you mind speaking to that a little bit, and what kind of work you're doing there?
Sure. So a couple months back, we were approached by a group of lawyers in New York that do similar work, right? Have been doing that work in New York surrounding COVID conditions in the jails. And so we had a brainstorm, and we came up with a similar tactic to sue the sheriff here in LA County for having unsafe COVID jail conditions, right? And we have a group of attorneys from the ACLU, from the Justice Collaborative, and other law firms. Barry Litt, who's a famous, also, it's a trip because he's really dope. He's an OG lawyer who was also an activist. And also he was part of that when they were, prosecuting people for being part of the Communist Party, I believe back in the, I want to say 50s or 60s, right? I want to say that old, but yeah, he's really dope. And a couple of Dan Stormer. And so, yeah, we've been suing the sheriff for having unsafe COVID condition. And it's really, really funny because our sheriff is he's a clown, so to speak, right? He always puts his foot in his mouth. He's going at it with the board of supervisors, which makes our job very easy to defund him. And yeah, so, and more recently though, he had the audacity and nerve to show a video of a group of prisoners who were in a mental health ward, which they failed to tell you that part, right? To disclose that, sharing cups. And then he used that for his media campaign to say, see, these prisoners, because other counties are releasing people who have COVID, these prisoners are infecting themselves so that they can be released. But when we did further investigation, we found out that they only had one cup. They were only giving them one cup. And these people are mentally unstable. They have mental health issues. So how can you hold them accountable? You're supposed to be the responsible party and make sure that these individuals are safely distancing, are not using each other's cups. Why would you have them all in a group like that, right?
Right.
So yeah, that is the work we're doing right now. We just did inspections. The attorneys went in with a jail expert to do inspections of LA County jails and give us some report backs. We're doing depositions right now and discovery, and the county has already asked for a settlement conference, so that will be coming up shortly.
All right, that's awesome. That's all awesome work. So I think does anybody have any questions, by the way? If you have a question, feel free to unmute and just let us know. Otherwise, I'll just, ask a few more on my end, but I want to make sure I get audience participation. If you guys want. All right.
I won't buy it. I just look mean.
I just recently came into the chat. I didn't come in here particularly at the beginning, and probably I missed a bunch of things. But are you willing, or can you help uncle of mine? He's kind of going through some things in Texas on a lockdown with the COVID stuff pertaining to his religious preferences and health concerns about some of the food that they're feeding them on the lockdown. Can you help him with that?
I could direct him to some folks out there that are doing the work, and also to the federal, it's the religious, is it our Religious Act? Anyways, it's a federal law that was passed that actually gives people certain rights in prison to make the prison system or the jail officials to conform with that person's religious dietary needs, because it is a federal law. And so they have to abide by that. If he has, kosher or Ramadan, etc., they have to make sure to provide him that type of meal. And I could give you some resources or case law on that if you like. My email is in the chat box. So if you want to email me, I can definitely give you some resources.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's see. Anybody else have any other questions about the work that Michael has done, or how they can get involved, anything like that? All right. Michael, you talked about, today we had a conversation on the phone a little bit ago, and we talked about how, the current conversation around, a defund the police is a big, hashtag being thrown around. But there's a lot of misinformation going around about what that means and whatnot. In your experience, what like what in your mind is like the best policy as far as, you know, making sure we can, you know, stymie the militarization of the police and police brutality generally?
Yeah, definitely. I think what people have to understand too is when they say defund the police, and you know, LA County was the first to actually defund the police. But if you're looking at the larger context, if they're getting $1 billion, $1 million is nothing, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's just a drop in the bucket. But what we're asking for is more, you know, of not just defunding. As a, you know, abolitionist centered organization and group and person myself who believes in abolition, I'm also realistic to the fact that we cannot just, you know, abolish something without replacing it with something that is going to be safety and you know, realistic, right? Because if we don't have any police, then people tend to, well, what's going to happen with our kids, with our mothers, with women, or people on the streets getting robbed or getting beat up or getting assaulted? Like, that's definitely not okay. And we have to do something that's going to make sure everybody feels safe in their communities. So it doesn't mean just like, you know, no safety no more. I think that's
Right.
that's unrealistic, right? And then also like, oh, no more prisons. We would like to get to that stage, but right now we need progressive steps, right? Which we are taking as the Alternatives to Incarceration work group, which I was speaking about earlier, the Justice LA work group. We're doing that work. We've implemented an Alternatives to Incarceration, basically a strategy, a blueprint to the county that's going to fund, again, housing. You know, so if you invest in community more than police, it takes away some of those reasons that people would commit crime, right? If you invest in jobs, if you invest in homelessness, if you invest in youth development. And then again, going back to like our community, what we're doing at Chucos with the peace building, there's certain things that the police cannot do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say, for instance, some of these elders that are in prison that were in solitary confinement for so long have the ability to say, you know what, we're going to have a peace treaty. They also have the ability, because they're respected in the communities, to be able to say,
Oh, Michael, yeah.
to be able to say, I want peace on the streets, right? I don't want you guys, the younger folks, gang banging or writing on people's walls or messing with people's houses, right? And that's just having that respect as an elder, as somebody who grew up in that neighborhood and who the kids look up to. Not to say that, oh, they're perfect mentors, right? But sometimes it's these very same people that have solutions, that are doing the work, like myself, that you come to us and you say, hey, you know, we need help. These people are writing on our walls all the time, or they're stealing from our cars. And so being able to hold people accountable and having those type of justice circles, those transformative justice circles with folks, is really important. When you're being held accountable by the people you love and then by the people that you work with every day in your community, it makes a difference. And it's a lot more healthy. It's a lot more holistic than just the punitive way police, as you said, the militarization of police and how they deal with folks. So typically what we're teaching folks at Chucos Justice Center, we have meetings, they have these classes every week called Alternatives to 911. And they teach the community, you know, let's say there's a domestic violence dispute and people are just arguing. People get loud sometimes and they're yelling and they're probably breaking stuff and they're cussing each other out. And most people get scared when they sit and they call 911, right?
Yeah.
And so when the police come, they're coming in, you know, full force, drawing their guns. They're going to put the man down on the ground. And if the man's drunk or something, or, you know, does something wrong, he could lose his life. If the man may be, or the woman may be, you know, undocumented, right? They could be deported just for this simple thing. So we teach people how to do de-escalation tactics, how to disarm people, you know, personal defense and these type of things. And so where we don't need to be calling the police, we're in situations where there might be a person with a mental health disorder acting out. Instead of calling the police, call somebody who's trained, have mental health people to be able to come out and deal with this situation. We don't need to call the police on every single thing. We don't need the police to be at every single dispute. We can resolve problems within our own community, within, you know, these type of processes called, you know, transformative justice circles, where people just talk. And that's the one thing that the punitive criminal justice system is lacking, right? That healing for the victim, because the victim doesn't get to have that closure as to why, and have that conversation with the person who harmed them. And I think that's important.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, we are out of time for the day, but thank you so much for joining us today, Michael. Hearing from you and your stories and your work, it's incredibly inspirational. And from all of us, just a great big congratulations on all that you've accomplished.
Thank you all.
For anyone interested, we will post the links that Michael shares with us on our social media pages, and as well as his talk and the talks from late last week. So, you know, stay in the fight, everyone, and stay safe and healthy. And again, Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you all. I hope you all have a good one.
Bye, Michael. Have a good day.